I trusted him with my life. I trusted him with my savings. One morning, I opened my bank app. My bank balance showed 0. And that's when I understood how easy it is to steal from someone who loves you. I didn't wake up angry. I wasn't suspicious. I was just married and still felt safe. I still remember how normal that morning felt. The fan was humming, the curtains barely moving, sunlight cutting thin lines across the wall. He was in the bathroom, brushing his teeth, complaining about the water pressure like he always did. Nothing felt wrong. That's the strange part. Loss doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits until you feel safe enough to look away. I made tea and opened my phone, not because I was worried, but because I was planning my day. Groceries, rent, a small transfer to my mother. I had been saving quietly for years, skipping little things, saying no to trips, telling myself security was love too. Money wasn't power to me, it was peace. The banking app took longer than usual to load. I remember feeling mildly annoyed. When the screen finally opened, I thought it was a glitch. The number didn't make sense. I refreshed it once, then again. I checked the account name, the last updated time, everything except my own breathing. 0 sat there calmly, like it had always belonged. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. My first thought was that I had made a mistake. Maybe I was in the wrong account. Maybe the app was down. I put the phone face down on the table and waited, like waiting could fix numbers. He walked out, towel around his neck, asking if breakfast was ready. I asked him casually, too casually, if he had moved some money. He didn't look surprised. He didn't ask how much. He just said yes, like it was obvious, like savings are communal air, like my years of discipline were a shared resource he could inhale without asking. He said it was temporary, that he needed it, that he would return it. He spoke gently, as if kindness could replace consent. I nodded because my body hadn't caught up with my mind yet. Inside, something shifted. Not broke, shifted. Trust doesn't shatter, it slides away. I looked at him and realized how quietly permission gets rewritten in marriage. Not with force, not with threats, but with familiarity. He assumed access because love had blurred boundaries. I learned then that trust isn't about intention, it's about asking. And when someone stops asking, they stop seeing you as separate. I finished my tea cold, tasting nothing, while the house stayed warm, ordinary, unchanged, as if safety had never existed. I didn't ask him where the money went that day. I asked myself why I hadn't protected it better. That question stayed with me longer than the shock. It followed me as I cleaned the kitchen and folded laundry and listened to him talk about work. He sounded normal. Too normal, like nothing irreversible had happened. That scared me more than the number on my screen. Over the years, I had learned to be careful. Not secretive, just careful. I kept receipts, I planned months ahead. I told myself I was being responsible for both of us. Somewhere along the way, that responsibility became invisible. It stopped being mine and started being assumed. He never asked how much I saved. He never asked what it cost me emotionally to build it. The small sacrifices, the quiet no's, the way I chose security over pleasure again and again. I realized the withdrawal wasn't just financial, it was relational. He had crossed a line without seeing it, because for him, the line didn't exist. Marriage had erased it. We shared a house, a bed, a future, so why not a bank balance? That logic lived comfortably in his mind. It felt like discovering a language I never agreed to learn. I watched him leave for work, keys in hand, humming. He kissed my forehead out of habit. I stood there smiling, practicing normal. When the door closed, the house felt larger, not empty, exposed. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the app again. 0 doesn't just represent absence, it represents finality. I understood then that trust, once taken, doesn't return in the same shape, even if the money did. something else had already been spent, something I couldn't earn back by saving harder. I didn't confront him again that day. Silence became my way of understanding what had changed. I wasn't angry yet. I was alert, watching, learning how fragile safety becomes when someone mistakes access for love. That lesson settled quietly inside me. It didn't scream, it waited, the same way betrayal often does. By the time evening arrived, I knew something essential was gone. Not money, permission, choice, the quiet right to be asked. And once that disappears, love begins to feel like a risk. I slept beside him that night, knowing nothing would feel untouched again. Morning would only confirm what my body already knew.
The days that followed moved slowly, like they were waiting for me to notice something I was still avoiding. He spoke less about the money and more about the future, as if shifting timelines could erase what had already happened. I listened, nodded, and stored everything away. When trust is shaken, you start collecting evidence without realizing it. I began remembering small moments I had dismissed before, times he told me not to worry, times he said everything was under control, times he made decisions first and explained them later. Back then, I called it confidence. Now it felt like rehearsal. Patterns don't appear suddenly. They reveal themselves when silence gives them space. I checked my account every morning, not because I expected the money to return, but because I needed to confirm the reality of it. Zero didn't change. Neither did he. That consistency hurt more than anger would have. It meant this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice he was comfortable living with. I realized how little I knew about his definition of partnership. For me, it meant discussion, mutual agreement, respect for effort. For him, it seemed to mean access, availability, the assumption that love removed the need for permission. That difference sat between us, invisible but heavy. I stopped sharing details about my day. Not intentionally, it just felt unsafe to offer parts of myself when boundaries had proven optional. Conversations became shorter, polite, functional. We talked about groceries, schedules, weather, anything that didn't require trust. At night, I lay awake longer than usual, not crying, just listening, to his breathing, to the fan, to my own thoughts rearranging themselves. I was learning how quickly security turns into vigilance, how love, once unquestioned, becomes something you monitor. He never apologized the way I needed. He explained, justified, promised, but never asked how it felt to wake up and realize your safety had been spent without your consent. That question stayed unspoken between us, growing louder each day. I understood then that betrayal doesn't always come with cruelty. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in familiarity, softened by shared history. That makes it harder to name, harder to leave, harder to heal. By the end of that week, I wasn't waiting for the money anymore. I was waiting for myself, for the moment when I would stop minimizing what happened and start accepting what it meant. That something essential had shifted, and pretending otherwise would only cost me more. By the time the money finally returned, something else was missing. Not relief, not gratitude. I felt nothing watching the balance change. Numbers came back, safety didn't. That was the part no one warns you about. Restitution doesn't restore trust. It only confirms that trust was broken in the first place. He expected things to go back to normal. He smiled more, spoke gently, made plans. I played along because I needed time to understand the version of myself that existed now, the one who checked permissions instead of assuming them, the one who noticed silence as information. I realized I had been generous in ways that went unnoticed, not just with money, but with patience, with belief, with benefit of doubt. I had extended trust repeatedly, thinking love would recognize it. Instead, it had been consumed quietly, without acknowledgement.
Marriage teaches you to merge, to soften edges, to share, but no one teaches you how to protect yourself inside that closeness. I thought saving money was protection. I was wrong. Protection is boundaries, and boundaries only work when they're respected. I stopped explaining my discomfort. I stopped trying to be understood. Understanding requires listening, and I was tired of translating pain into language he could dismiss. Instead, I observed. I watched how easily he moved forward, how quickly he forgot, how naturally he benefited from my silence. That's when I accepted the truth I had been avoiding. What hurt wasn't the withdrawal, it was the assumption, the belief that my effort was available by default, that my consent was implied, that love erased the need to ask. I didn't confront him dramatically. I didn't leave suddenly. This wasn't that kind of story. This was quieter. I began reclaiming myself in small ways. Separate accounts, separate plans, separate thoughts. Independence doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like preparation. The house stayed the same. Our routines continued, but I wasn't the same person moving through them. I had learned something irreversible. Trust must be protected even in love, especially in love. Losing money taught me how fragile safety is when someone mistakes closeness for entitlement. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. You just decide what it will cost you next time and whether you're willing to pay.
Some losses don't come with warnings. They come quietly and change how you trust forever. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Subscribe for more quiet stories that speak the things people don't say out loud.